I'm sorry. You see, my jaw still hurts from gaping open so wide while I watched a CBC hit piece that, in my opinion, excuses away the rise in Christophobic acts of hate targeting churches since 2021 across Canada. Let's talk about it. Drea Humphrey here with Rebel News, the independent news outlet that doesn't back down from telling you the side of the story that the state-backed broadcasters, like at the CBC, often refuse to tell. That's why when I saw the CBC's new hit piece called "Why Dozens of Churches in Canada Have Been Torched and Burned," I knew you and I were going to have this little chat. Now, in case you don't already know, shortly after the Tecumseh-Swetmit First Nation government released the shocking claim in 2021 that they had discovered the remains of 215 former Kamloops Indian residential school students buried in an unmarked grave, at least 96 churches across the country have been burnt or vandalized. Now, we debunked the 215 dead kids claim in my investigative documentary, which I'll link in the description box below. But do you think the CBC led with mention that the likely catalyst to our nation's church burning spree was sparked by falsehoods? Of course not. Instead, it kicks off with Osoyoos Indian Band's longtime chief, Clarence Louie, driving to the scene of one of the first churches to burn after that false claim, while he says the following.
I mean, I'm pissed at the church. I got no respect for the church. That cross has done so much damage. I mean, caused so much grief and killed so many people, not just Native people.
I'm sorry, what? The church is a bunch of killers? We're talking about churches burning today, in Canada now. So how are those churches a bunch of killers? And also, why not give a more appropriate label? Like, I don't know, churches volunteering at your local soup kitchen, or running recovery houses, or coming together to fight human trafficking. Not to mention, today, there are actual groups committing actual killings, massacres even, in the name of other religions around the world. But do you think for just 1 second the CBC would feature someone's generalized commentary expressing their disdain for those places of worship because they're said killers? And do you think if they did, they wouldn't challenge it? Chief Louie backpedals a little bit, and he says that his words have nothing to do with the Christian religion, but solely the building itself. But is that really what such rhetoric actually means to Christians? Or better yet, to the vandals and arsonists who are targeting their places of worship? Nah. My guess is when you burn a church to send a message, it's not to the drywall. Instead, you're sending the message to what and whom the church represents, aka Christ followers. Next, Chief Louie and the CBC producer Terry Reith, that's right, they pulled out the big guns for this report, step on to what's left of St. Gregory's Church in Osoyoos, which isn't much, by the way.
You've walked up these steps a few times as a child?
Yeah, I didn't like it. We were forced to come in here. We were heathens, right? We were savages. We had to come in here and have the white man save our souls. That's what we were taught.
Now, I'm not going to minimize Chief Louie's experience here. If that truly was his experience, I'm sorry it happened. I'm Black and Indigenous and have been going to churches my entire life, and never once has anyone there made me to feel like some savage who needed to be saved by the white man. Instead, they preached that I could use my free will to be saved by Jesus Christ. Now, in any institution, you'll sometimes find evil people doing evil things. It could happen in churches, schools, the government, heck, it can even happen in the magical place of Disney. But once again, CBC drops the ball here. You see, when I got my boots on the ground to Osoyoos to report on the church fires just after they happened, I showed you both sides, both Indigenous community members who had been harmed by the church or felt they had, and also those who loved the church and had many experiences and were sad to see them up in flames. Because that's what a journalist should do, right?
I loved it. And I don't like seeing it all pile of crap. I hope they rebuild or do something.
Instead, the CBC take on this gives the impression that Chief Louie speaks for all. Now, I'm only going to show you a couple more clips. You can watch the full piece by clicking on the written report for this report you're watching in the description box below. But about midway, it cuts to Chief Louis giving his thoughts on who could have maybe started these arsonists, and he points the finger at his own people.
I was upset that some res punks did arson. Whoever did it didn't ask for permission from the rest of the community or the chief and council. They did it under the cover of darkness, and I call that arson.
Never found out who did it.
Nobody knows who did it. We can guess. I don't think white people came here and burnt this down.
Well, I can tell you that not all of the church attackers have been res punks. Take a look at these two twins who targeted a church in Vancouver. But whoever they are, in Osoyoos, they're targeting Indigenous communities in the dead of summer. It could have had detrimental effects. Now, I guess the CBC thought they'd better get at least one more Indigenous person to speak to the church attacks. Of course, not one that would balance out Chief Louis' thoughts. Instead, they picked someone who has even more extreme forms of justification for the fires. Listen to her.
The church fires, they're much more than just arson. It's a greater symbolic kind of narrative of Canada and Canada's relationship to Indigenous peoples, which is really lacking. It's on fire because no one's really addressing the truth of what Indigenous peoples are facing. So it leads to a larger conversation that needs to be had.
You hear that, folks? This assistant professor at the University of Alberta thinks that nothing is wrong here, it seems. Christian places of worship are simply going up in flames and being defaced for a symbolic way to open up some dialogue, because despite Indigenous studies being mandatory across schools across the country, land acknowledgements that often make Canadians feel unwelcome in their own country being common practice, and millions and billions of dollars going into Indigenous communities for reconciliation, we're not being heard. Well, what about the Indigenous Christians who are having their places of worship being targeted? Are they being heard? Or are they simply still stuck under the white man's spell? And what about those who don't feel heard by the government? Should people start burning and vandalizing government buildings to open up dialogue? We really shouldn't be surprised that CBC published this hit piece in various forms, I might add. After all, look how the hand that feeds them, Prime Minister Trudeau, responded when it was clear that such hateful Christophobic acts were happening in his country.
Canada needs to recognize that the shame of our past is echoed today in continuing injustices, intolerance, and unfairness towards Indigenous peoples.
Now look at how Trudeau's RCMP security detail treat independent journalists, yours truly, who dared to ask him why he refused at the time to call the burning and vandalized churches acts of hate. You talked about Canada's last wrongs, the past things they haven't done right. When will you speak out about the 20 vandalized churches? They're burning churches and vandalizing them, and you're not calling it a hate crime. You know, if you slow that down, you can actually see it's Trudeau who broke the comfortable distance between him and I before his thugs tossed me to the side. And if you watch the full report, you'll see that his security detail had it in from us from the start, whether it be propping their foot in front of us or the head of his security awkwardly asking me if we're going to be asking tough questions, because he knows Rebel News will. I'm Drea Humphrey with Rebel News.
With the which story?
Rebel News.
Okay, are you guys allowed to be here?
Of course.
Okay.
Good.
Yeah, nice
What's
to
your
meet you.
name?
Drea.
Drea, nice.
Yeah.
And you guys, are you with a media? Or?
Yeah, we're independent media.
And what
yeah.
is it?
Rebel News.
And okay, I've heard of it, but I don't know much. I work with the protected detail, so.
Right.
I see.
Okay.
But being independent, maybe it's the name that throws me off. Rebel, like. Do you
And it was
try
probably
usually
pretty accurate.
to ask like hard questions? Or,
Yes, we do ask.
But you respect the time allowed.
Yeah,
Not gonna bump in.
absolutely.
Okay.
We're completely professional, yeah.
That's really good.
Yeah. Thank God for Rebel News. And thank God for you, the people who keep us running. It's a place where reporters work hard to show you what state-packed CBC reporters won't. And instead, they go and cook up dangerously evasive pieces like this that, in my opinion, sends the message to Christophobic criminals looking to open up dialogue that attacking Christian places of worship, well, CBC's got their back. Drea Humphrey with Rebel News. If you appreciate that, unlike the CBC, we get our boots on the ground to give you the full picture of these church attacks and the false unmarked grave claims that likely fueled them, then we'd appreciate your help being able to continue to do so. If you go to rebelfieldreports.com, you can chip in a few bucks to keep our journalism going strong. We appreciate your support.